Now, finished my video on Monopoly, and then as soon as I finished, I realized there's a lot of stuff I left unsaid, and so rather than err on the side of leaving it out, I think I'll err on the side of being overly vigorous, if that's even the case. So your contention, your assertion that you didn't back up, but you made as self-evident that monopolies are automatic or guaranteed or whatever, let alone that they're a contradiction, um, has numerous problems. One, of course, is the profit. The profit's going to draw in other competitors, but there are other problems. Now, these are problems most socialists don't think about because they do not understand economics or reality really, and they kind of have this weird, non-analytical vision of the world. So, one problem is that they seem to always think that, well, as a firm gets bigger, it becomes more competitive, or in some way, uh, yeah, basically more competitive. And there are certain advantages that's true to economies of scale and having a lot of capital and having a big factories or whatever and a lot of employees. Certainly, there are advantages. However, there are also disadvantages, and both of them are always in play. And what this boils down to is that being big and established doesn't guarantee success. In fact, it can make failure almost inevitable in certain circumstances. There's a YouTube user, I don't know if he makes many videos anymore, but his name is KBiomech. And he worked at Domino's for a very long time. And he was describing this very problem, and he said, Domino's is an extremely aggressive, extremely competitive company. They are always on their toes. And he said, but they have thousands and thousands of stores. And every so often it becomes necessary to make changes throughout the entire industry. And I know the blase thing to retort is just going to be, well, they're so rich they can just afford it. And like, well, they're rich, but then when they have to make a change, it's that much more expensive. So, for instance, the pizza ovens might cost $15,000, $20,000. And like, well, that's nothing for Domino's. Yeah, but if they have to change 5,000 of them, there's that many of the units plus all the transportation plus all the labor, and ends up being many tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, and something that will take literally years. And if you're a small pizza place with only two or three restaurants or one, it takes a day, one afternoon. And the thing about it is that it's not like to make money, all you need to do is produce a lot. There's an entrepreneurial element that socialists always discount, and that is consumers can just decide that they don't like what you want. Not because they have anything against you, it's just their taste can change. People just decide they don't like pizza anymore. It doesn't matter how big Domino's is. They have a real problem. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed to go out of business, but they'd have to completely change their entire mode, or if people change what kind of pizza they like, or any number of other things. Mises has a good quote. I'm not going to quote it because I don't have it in front of me, but basically, look, consumers don't care about how good the capitalists are, how smart, how hardworking. They care what they want, and their caprice is absolute. And you can have the most badass corporate board and the best factory and the best workers, and consumers can just say, you know what, we don't like your flavor of ice cream, and you can go out of business just like that. Now, uh, Rothbard noted this a long time ago, and he probably wasn't the first. And Art Carden gave a good lecture on it at the Mises Institute a couple of years ago, and it basically applies Mises's socialist economic calculation problem to firms. And I'm not going to rehash the whole Misesian point here, other than to just say, as firms get bigger, they become less efficient. It becomes harder to manage, and their mistakes become more dire. Uh, let's say, for instance, that you have a mom and pop local grocery store, and they just own the store, and then they buy the produce either locally, and they contract with a trucking company to bring in certain supplies, so often. And the trucking company doesn't work for them. It's not owned by them. And the trucking company knows how much they're getting paid to bring it, and they know how much it costs in gas and labor to get it there. And so if there's fluctuations, the price of gas goes up, or the price of labor, or price of insurance, or whatever, the trucking company knows that, and they can, talk to the owners of the store. I'm like, well, rates have to go up or rates have to go down, and they, they're very much attuned to it. But say Walmart, who owns their own trucking industry, and I don't know if they do 100%, but to a certain extent they do. Then they're less attuned to those changes, and it's conceivable, if they were big enough, that they would not even be aware. They could be hemorrhaging enormous sums of money through their trucks and not really even realize it, because since it's all within the corporate umbrella, the losses aren't seen as well. And so this is it's just like in physics. Why aren't there elephants that are 60 tons and 40 feet high at the shoulder? Well, because gravity makes it almost impossible for an animal to get that big. The weight of such an animal would break its own legs. It just wouldn't work. Well, this although it's not physically similar, the analogy is the same, though. It's analogous in that as firms get bigger, they become less able to calculate. It becomes more difficult for them to make calculations. It becomes harder for them to manage, and so they become less competitive as they get bigger, at least in certain respects. And so there's no, it's kind of like socialists imagine it like a video. Like, have you ever seen that video game where you're a fish and you start out small, and as you eat bigger fish, or you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you can just get so big you can eat all the fish? It's not like that at all. You can be the biggest company in the world, and people can just decide they don't like what you have to sell. So, and then you go out of business. Or you can never eat all the fish, and there's always companies that compete with you, not directly but indirectly. So pop companies aren't only competing with pop companies. They compete with coffee and with tea and with juice and with bottled water and regular water and tap water and water filters, and car manufacturers. They compete with motorcycles and bikes and trains and airplanes, and to just have this real narrow view that if you have one or two firms that are really big and a lot of small firms, that's somehow a detriment. It's not. If the bigger firms start raising their rates, then they're going to lose market share to the smaller firms, so they can't raise their rates. They can't eliminate all their competition. So there's going to be certain regional proclivities that almost make that impossible. So even if you're the biggest, most efficient producer of, say, oil, and you can do it cheaper than anybody else, somewhere there's a little home oil refinery that has their own supply of oil, and even though they can't refine it as cheap as you, the fact that they don't have to transport it means that in their town it's going to be cheaper than your oil because you got to truck it there still. And you'll never be able to, and I'm just using that as one example, but it always is the case that there'll be people with local advantage because just for transportation costs alone. So this free market monopoly myth, it's a myth. It's never happened. There's no theoretical reason why it can. You didn't provide one, and the ones you might provide are pretty shoddy. Like, oh, they'll just, every time you make $1, it becomes easier to make another $1, and it's just exponential, and before you know it, you eat up all the other companies. It just doesn't work that way. And I don't know where this is coming from. You don't provide any evidence. You just say there's a contradiction, and you don't explain why. You just say that it's there, and expect it to be convincing. Now, I'm hesitating whether I should start really ripping into the Venus Project. It's kind of low-hanging fruit as far as it goes. I know that the cult members all believe that it's the second coming or something, and but it's old school communism, socialism with graphics. That's all it is. And all the problems inherent in socialism are inherent in the Venus Project. And I think there's just certain kind of person who's extremely malleable and easy to control, maybe by any kind of advertising, especially a kind put out on the internet. So, uh, yeah, I think that's it on this one. Free market monopolies never happened, can't happen. So, I mean, you're running out of contradictions here. You're running out of things, and I'm titling these videos and I'm making it in a way that they're a little bit more general. It would be cool if you had attempted to refute any of this. I certainly, I mean, you challenged me. What about the contradictions in capitalism? And I have, I have come to the plate. I've produced a lot of video and a lot of content dealing with it, and I'll be really surprised, but I'd be pleased if you were to respond appropriately. And appropriately doesn't mean, oh, don't be manipulated by the propaganda and look at history. You're going to have to be more specific than that. I cited historical works that aren't even by free market advocates. Again, I'll say it again. Triumph of Conservatism by Gabriel Coco. You can read that book and then you can come back to me and tell me it's bullshit. And I could cite others, but you would just dismiss them because they're capitalist. You know, and there's a whole other line of reasoning here. I mean, when Peter Schiff says that, Peter Schiff says, well, we don't have capitalism, we have, the government, and the government's the problem. But then you don't concede his point, and you basically just say, well, let's just pretend that it is free markets, and then look at the disparity of wealth. I mean, no. So, all right, later.